Hello and welcome back to another VMK from medicnose.com. In this video I'll be showing you how to implement a player class. Now the player class is going to be inherited from the camera class, since the player is really represented by the camera in the game engine. So as we move the player around, we're actually moving the camera, which is what the player sees through his own eyes. Now once we create this player class, we'll be able to add new functionality that we didn't have with the camera class. Things like we'll be able to jump, we'll be able to crouch, we'll be able to shoot, things like that, since we are now going to be a player rather than just a camera. If you find my videos helpful, please support my website by going to www.medicnose.com, and you can support the website by clicking on the PayPal icon to make a donation, or clicking on any of the Google ads that are shown on the website. So let's go into our game engine here and see what we have. As we see, we currently are using a camera, which is a member variable for our game engine, and we're using it to control the movements that you as a player see. So in the constructor here, we see that we're setting the camera position. In the handle mouse, we see we're handling how to move the camera whenever we move the mouse, as well as handle keyboard handles how to translate the camera and rotate it whenever you're pressing keyboard commands. So all this stuff is going to be replaced now by a player class. But before we can get to that, we have to create this player class. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go into the solution environment here, and we'll add the player class into the scene here, since that's where the camera also is. So let's go ahead and create the player.cpp and the player.h. And again, we're putting them into the scene folder here. Scene. And looks like we just have to move that over, and this one's already set up. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the player.h. The player class looks like this. At the top, we include camera.h, and we need this because the player class is inherited from camera. So for player class to be able to use all the functions and member variables of camera, we need to include this up here at the top. The player class has the following functions. It has a constructor and a virtual destructor, and then we have something called setILevel, which takes in a parameter, and we have an update. In this video we won't be doing anything with the update, but later on when we start adding functionality, then we'll need to add lots of code into this one function here. The members of the class include a player state and a floating point number that represents the eye level. Now we haven't defined this player state yet, so let's do that right now. We can do that here in the structs. To begin, we'll just allow one player state. So the player state by default will be walking. So as you press the keys on the keyboard, you'll move forward or back, left and right, or you can turn. Now let's go into the player.cpp file. At the top, we include the precompiled headers and the player.h, and in our constructor, we set the state to be walk. The destructor doesn't have anything special, so it doesn't do anything. Now the next function is called setILevel, but let me explain to you first how this is supposed to work. If we go into OpenGL, the constructor here, we see that before what we're doing is we use the camera and we set it to a certain position. Now this setting here was to enable us to offset the location of our camera above the ground so that we're not looking sort of parallel with the ground. Well, we're going to replace this with setILevel. So what this is going to do is it's going to set our eye level above the ground, just the same way that the camera did it over here. Now the difference between what we had here and what we're going to implement is this negative sign here. we're going to actually wrap this negative sign inside the camera class, so we don't have to worry about these negative values. Instead, we can pass values in here that seem to make more sense to us. Since a height above the ground would be positive, we're going to change this to be a positive value than a negative. So let's change that right now. All we need to do is go into the camera class, and under set, whatever we're going to be passing, we're going to actually pass into our position here, but we're going to take the negative value of it. So by making this change here, that means that over here we can pass a positive value like this. Now, we're actually going to get rid of this since we don't need it, and instead we're going to put it into the initialize down below. But before we do that, we have to go and finish the player class here. So let's go ahead and work on the player class some more. Okay, so set the eye level. What it does is we pass into it a value for where we want the eye level to be, and before we were setting it to 0.1 above the level, so basically we'll be calling this function and sending 0.1 into here. So when we receive that, what we're going to do is we're going to call the set function from the camera class, and we're going to set it to x, y, and z, y being the eye level that the user is specifying here, and x and z are going to remain the same meaning whatever the camera is already set to. So it's just going to get the camera position, x and z, and then send it back to the set function so that these values don't change. We only change in the y. And then we're storing the eye level here into our member variable. And we'll need this for the next video. You'll see whenever we start implementing things like jumping or crouching, we need to know where our eye level is supposed to be. The last function of the player here is called update. Now, for now, we're not going to be doing anything in update, but in the next video, we'll be adding a bunch of code into the update. Okay, so that's basically the player class as it is. Now we need to go and modify the OpenGL part here so that instead of using camera, we use the player. So to begin, let's go and modify the actual class for the game. If we scroll down to the bottom here, we see we're using camera here. So we're going to replace this with player, and we're just going to call this player. And by making this change, we have to go and replace camera up here with player. Now, by including player, if we go into the .h, we see we're already including the camera, so we don't lose any of the functionality from the camera. And then now what we have to do is go and change all of the code that used to use camera and make it use player instead. So let's go into here, and we have to modify now the initialization, which we can do in here. Just at the bottom, we can go and set mPlayer dot, and the name of the function we're looking for is set eye level. And here we're going to pass 0.1f. So that's going to cause our player to be 0.1 units above the ground. And the easiest way to find all the places where we used camera is just to do a search for it. And then anytime we find one, we can just replace it with mPlayer, like this. So let's just replace them all. Okay. I think that should be all of them now. And let's save this and try to build it. Okay. And if we go and run it, we should see exactly the same thing we did before. We can move left and right, up and down, forward, back, strafe, and turn. Okay, so we didn't lose any functionality by adding that extra class. Now what we can do though is start adding functionality into the player class that will enable us to do things we couldn't do before with just the camera. Before we start adding functionality into the player, I do want to make one additional change to the camera class. Personally, I like to have my mouse be inverted when I move my mouse up and down. So I'm going to add the capability to do that. If we go into the camera.h here, and under struct, I'm going to add this enumeration called mouse look. And I'll have two options. There's the normal mouse look, and then there's the inverted mouse look. So when it's set to normal, that means when you move the camera, or when you move the mouse forward, it's going to cause the camera to tilt upward. And if you move the mouse back, it's going to cause the camera to tilt down. However, when we set it to invert, that functionality is going to be reversed. So when we move the mouse down, it's going to cause the camera to go up. And when we move the mouse up, it's going to cause the camera to go down. So to enable this functionality, we have to add an extra member variable into the camera class as well. The variable we're going to be adding is going to be a protected member, and it's a mouse look enumeration, and we're just going to call it m_mouse look state. Now, the reason why I'm putting it under protected rather than private is because we're not setting this value here within the camera class. Instead, we're setting it within the inherited player class. So if we put it under private section here, the player wouldn't be able to change it. But because it's protected, we can change it in the player, but you can't change it outside of camera, nor can you change it outside of the player class. So inside the player constructor here, we now have to set that value. So we can do that, and as I said before, I like it inverted, but if you prefer normal, then just set this here to normal. And let's try to build this and give it a run. Forward, back, left, right. Okay, if I move the mouse forward, it's going up, and this is going down. Okay, the inversion hasn't taken effect yet because I forgot to do one thing. I have to use this mouse state now somewhere within the code so that the inversion actually takes effect. Now the place to add the use of this variable here would be in the camera class, since that's where we actually move the camera. So let's go into the camera, and it's under the move. So what we want to do is we want to flip the up and down looking direction. All we need to do now is just multiply this value here that we calculate by this new value that we have for the look state. And we have to repeat that here for the look down as well. So if you notice the way that I've implemented this enumeration, again, if we go back to the camera.h, we'll see when it's normal, we're going to be multiplying by 1, so there is no change. However, when we invert, we multiply by -1, so everything will be upside down. Now let's go test this out. And run it. Okay, so now when I'm moving the mouse forward, I'm pitching down, and this is up. Left is still left, and right is still right. And movement with the keyboard is still exactly the same. Okay, so that's how we implement the player class. Now, come back for the next tutorial, and I'll show you how to add the ability to jump.